Welcome to Movies, where we talk about movies. My name is Zoe, and welcome to my review of Pearl a month after this movie has come out. I know nobody's probably actively looking for a review of Pearl, but I just love this movie so much that I had to talk about it on here. I apologize for how long it's taking me to get this video up. I just had midterms and I wanted to make sure all of those were situated, and I also fell into a movie slump, so that was really awesome, perfect timing. When I started writing this script, I just found myself getting exhausted really quickly, and I really had no desires to pick up any films, but thankfully it's starting to go away and it's over with. I can now continue my quest of becoming a masterful cinephile. Woo! Hope you liked the change of scenery. Wanted to make sure I was sitting in front of my two bad boys. For this video, I tried my best to look like Pearl and dress up like her little farmer outfit. Do I look like the pretty girls in pictures? So, Pearl is the prequel to X, a movie that came out earlier this year in March, and both are directed by Ty West. In Pearl, we follow Pearl, the main antagonist and old woman from X, but as her younger self. We watch her chase her dream of being a dancer until she realizes that her surroundings have been suffocating her, leading to dire consequences and rash decisions. She will do anything to achieve her dreams and take down anybody who gets in the way of that. Pearl takes place in 1918. Completely forgot to mention that 1918 is when the Great Influenza hit. It lasted from 1918 to 1920. Which is really funny and very real for us watchers because we just experienced and are still currently experiencing a pandemic where everybody wears masks and people are scared to go outside. It's a hard and scary time, and to see it on screen but just in a different time period definitely adds to the uneasiness of this film. Although this movie was marketed as a huge horror movie, it's more of a character study. Mia Goth worked alongside Ty West to write this script, and that 100% translates to the screen. Also, I apologize for how this mic comes in and out of frame. I have to hold it because I don't have my desk in front of me in order to film right here, so if that bothers you, get out of here. Skedaddle! The two of them really dove deep into Pearl as a character and getting into her psyche. We find out what drives her, what hinders her, and why she was so obsessed with Maxxxine in X. I think Pearl is a perfect pairing with X and even enhances it. A lot of people say that you can't see Pearl without seeing X, but I think it would actually be really cool to watch this in chronological order rather than when it came out. And I imagine it's a completely different experience getting to watch Pearl when she's younger and then seeing what happens in X. I can't imagine the emotional turmoil somebody would go through watching Pearl first and then X. It's just a crazy transition into each other, but again, these movies work so well together. I personally really enjoyed Pearl, dare I say, even more than X. At first when I watched X, I wasn't super into it, but upon rewatching it, I became obsessed and I really saw it for what it actually is, which is gorgeous. I think with modern film, it can be really hard to echo and embody the old Hollywood feel just because of how much we have advanced with technology and filming in general. But Ty West absolutely nails it with the soundtrack and the transitions and the costumes. It's just great. This movie is great. When I talk about this movie, I'm going to have 4 categories. I'm going to have the scare factor, the cinematography, the soundtrack, and the performance and characters. Just so I can organize my thoughts a little bit better and it's just easier for y'all to digest. Nothing like a more organized video to click through, am I right? Cause I'll be sectioning off this video, so if you only want to listen to me talk about the cinematography, you can. If you want to, go ahead. A view is a view, baby.
Make me the biggest star the world has ever known.
Alright, so getting into the scare factor, let's talk about what makes Pearl so scary. Even Martin Scorsese was shaking in his little boots after he watched this film. He said it was deeply terrifying, kept him up at night, which is honestly awesome. It's great for like non-mainstream movies to be talked about by big directors. Now, a lot of you are like, not mainstream. A lot of people actually don't know about these movies. It's kind of crazy. That might just be the people around me, but I thought Pearl and X were these big movies that everybody was going to be chatting about, but nobody really was. I am just like so far up A24's ass that I know everything that's dropping. Not everybody's like that, and I need to realize that. Pearl is the face to the problems we pretend we do not have. She feels intense jealousy, raging anger, lustful desires, and questions her morality. As for jealousy, she thinks about the people who succeed and why she can't be them. What do they have that she doesn't? What makes them so special and not her? She's supposed to be a star, so why isn't she? It absolutely eats her alive. As for the anger, she feels it so deep that she goes to the extent of killing people. She's just so angry at the world and the people around her that have been holding her back that she completely unleashes. Her lustful desires, especially in this time period of the early 1920s, is looked down upon, and stag films were very, very illegal at this time. So feeling lustful desires publicly was basically embarrassing enough to get you sent out of town or something like that. I don't know what people did back then. As for morality, she questions whether or not she is a good person.
But truth is, I'm not really a good person.
Because she feels overwhelming emotions, and that means she isn't a psychopath, right? In her eyes, it's really hard to distinguish because the people around her aren't great examples, and when you are suffering like that, it's really hard to come face to face with the realness and the reality of the situation. And alongside that, we are forced to watch Pearl suffer and spiral. Pearl is just like us in a lot of ways. She wants so bad to be known in Hollywood and to be the star that everybody loves. Because in her life, she feels very walked over and overlooked, and like nobody actually cares about the things that she cares about. Personally, for me, being overlooked is a huge fear, so watching this movie, it was awful watching her get overlooked by literally everybody in this film. Whether that be when people were completely walking all over her, completely dismissing her, or just belittling her. All Pearl wants is to be loved and to escape from her reality. And you cannot help but feel for her, which is just as scary. As I mentioned in my last video, it is hard to empathize with the villain, but it's, again, really hard not to when you watch their backstories so raw and so real, just like Pearl is. A big thing Ty West wanted to emphasize in this is that horror doesn't stop just because the sun rises. Even though it's bright outside, there are still terrors and nightmares right before our eyes. I mean, hell, we see in Pearl that even in this technicolor dreamy world, there are still nightmares and murder. A majority of the murder shots take place outside in daylight, and that's horrifying. In X, all the horror takes place at night, and this is a complete 180 from that. And going from that, we're going to talk about the cinematography. There are so many cool shots in this film, especially comparable ones to X, like the barn door opening to start the scene, and another dance sequence from Pearl, similarly to when she's dancing in front of the car in X. That has to be my favorite shot from this. It's like the first opening of Pearl and the light is only shining on her. She is the sole focus and the star of the show, just like she deserves. It's absolutely stunning. The reflections on the mirror and just the blackness surrounding her. Oh my gosh, I want to give it a kiss. It's literally so good. There are also a lot of shots in this that you could compare to The Wizard of Oz. Not only just the technicolor of it, the shot where she's riding her bike and you cross the scarecrow, very Gulch, and obviously there's a scarecrow. And what kind of review would this be, talking about the cinematography and the shots, if we weren't going to talk about the final shot? Oh my gosh, it's horrifying just to watch her start crying and stare deeply into the camera. I literally was like gripping the sides of my seat. It was making me feel so unsettled, but I think it was the perfect ending to this movie. And the fact that it was one take, this was the take that they got. Ty West wanted to keep filming, he did that keep rolling signal, and Mia Goth went with it. And she just held that smile. Oh, what a great idea. She is such a genius when it comes to nailing this character, and it's so admirable. She is truly a phenomenal actress, and I can't imagine anybody else playing this role, but more on that later. And after all this suffering, Pearl has finally made it to the big screen in this movie, but we see the ugly truth of who she is, and I think the final shot really captures that feeling and captures what's going on in her head. Alongside the shots, I also want to talk about the editing in this section. I think it was so great at nailing the old Hollywood feel. I mean, with the closing circle transitions and the Gaussian blurs, and even the part where there is a murder happening and it's like split in the middle and it's a reflection. I thought that was so cool. I think the editing aids in putting you in the time frame that this is set in. Movies could be set in the 1900s, but nowadays still use modern film techniques, but this one really leans into the classicness of it. Ty West wanted to bring us back to the 1920s, and he did a great job at doing that. Going from that, we're going to be talking about the characters and performances. Mia Goth's performance as Pearl is deeply and utterly terrifying. Mia Goth combines the two sides of Pearl harmoniously, with the naive farm girl and the murderous, jealous woman. One of my favorite parts from Mia Goth's performance, not only the monologue, which is great, and the final shot, all of that, Her screams are insane. I mean, we got to see some of that in X when she played Maxine, but in this, I felt the utter despair that Pearl was experiencing. Spoiler alert. In the scene where Pearl is turned down for the role of the traveling dance company, her reaction is so heartbreaking and also just horrifying. She screams, "No, I'm a star, please, I'm a star," which is actually probably my favorite quote from this movie besides, "Why are you leaving me? If I didn't do anything wrong, I don't understand, I thought you liked me!" That one, I swear it like broke the speakers in the theater that I was in. It was so funny. They're just so guttural and intense, and she's just screaming and saying no and help me, and it's insane. And then suddenly she just switches, and right after that she becomes the real Pearl that we see in X. Although this movie is a character study for Pearl, I still feel like the characters have a lot of thought put into them and are very well written. I like to look at these characters as parts of Wizard of Oz. They each play a different role and they fit really well into it. So this section is going to have a good bit of spoilers, so I'm going to put a time up in the corner of the screen to skip to for the next section. Pearl is Dorothy. Dorothy chases her dreams of escaping reality and wants nothing more but to live away from adults, or those who are holding her back. She is our young heroine, but in this case, ours finds comfort in murder rather than friendship. Pearl's mother, Ruth, is Gulch, or the Wicked Witch. She holds back Pearl from her love of dance and all of her dreams. She keeps her trapped and pinned down. But when Ruth dies and she's burning and Pearl throws a bucket of water on her, that's basically the last thing that happens to her before she dies, in the same way that the Wicked Witch died in The Wizard of Oz. Pearl's father is the Tin Man. He's unable to live on his own without the aid of others. The Tin Man needs oil from his friends in the same way that Pearl's father needs aid from his family. He's bound to a wheelchair and rusty in his ways, but forced to watch and feel and process everything that's going on around him without being able to do anything, in the same way that the Tin Man probably did when he was rusted and couldn't move but still saw all this stuff going on around him. Even with the lack of facial expressions, there's still so much emotion that you witness from Pearl's father, and it's really heartbreaking. The projectionist is the wizard. He wants Pearl to join his world and attempt to help him gain fame, but possibly at her own expense. Who knows what would happen if she was in a stag film and the town found out? She would be shunned, but not him. The wizard is an embellisher and he's a deceptionist. I mean, in the film, he lies to Dorothy about being able to see into the crystal ball, and in Oz, he's just kind of a big fraud. Now, we can't exactly know how their storyline would turn out, and if he was really a genuine person, because it stops pretty abruptly due to Pearl just hacking him with a pitchfork. Yeah, brutal, but in typical Pearl fashion, in the same way that she does in X. Really cool. Mitzi is Glinda the Good Witch. She's kind and compassionate, and she has everything and gets everything that Pearl wants. Her golden hair, in a way, forms a halo around her, and while she's not exactly an angel, it still kind of represents this purity that Glinda the Good Witch represents. And that leaves Howard as the Cowardly Lion. At the end of the film, he walks in on Pearl at the table with her dead parents and can't do anything but stand there in fear. He's completely overcome with shock, and I can't imagine how he felt in that moment. He was probably terrified out of his mind. I do wish we could have seen a little bit more past the end scene where we can see how Howard becomes like a true and faithful accomplice to Pearl, because in X he doesn't protest anything and he is a really good helper in all this. He is fully with Pearl and isn't really as scared of her anymore, so it would be cool if we could have seen that in between, but some people are wishing for a whole different movie for Howard, and I feel like that's just like a little too much. He is way too scared to stand up to Pearl, and we can only assume that's how he just starts working with her. He is so scared that he doesn't want to become one of her victims, so he instead helps her in getting them. One thing I love about this movie is you get to see all these characteristics that come into play in X, but you see a reasoning behind them in Pearl. After her audition, the judge in the middle says, "We want somebody more all-American, younger and blonde, someone with X Factor," which is basically the cast of X, and later explains why she kills Bobby Lynn in X. She's blonde and has that X Factor, as well as Maxine has the X Factor, and everybody else has it, but she doesn't. And you watch how this audition to Mitzi, and following that leads her to really despising blondes because they embody this all-American that they were looking for and Pearl doesn't, which continues to emphasize this whole trope of Pearl being so confused and lost as to why she doesn't have the X Factor that other people do have. While Mia Goth's performance in this movie is definitely the standout, everybody else did a fantastic job. And this movie wouldn't be what it was if we didn't have these awesome performances from these actors. So shout out to you guys. Thank you for that. Alright, and the last section we're going to be talking about is the soundtrack. The soundtrack does nothing but complement this film in this old Hollywood feel. It is so dreamy and just so beautiful. I remember they released Pearl's main title alone before they released the rest of the soundtrack, and I was basically like bouncing out of my chair waiting for the rest of the soundtrack to drop because Pearl's main title is so gorgeous. When I first listened to it, I just played it on repeat. I could not get it out of my head. I absolutely loved this soundtrack. A couple of my favorites were Pearl's main title, obviously, The Whole World Is Gonna Know My Name, and Hot House Rags. The Whole World Is Gonna Know My Name is literally a whole movie in itself. I feel like I go through so many emotions listening to it. It's so beautiful and flows in the beginning so well, and then it just becomes so stagnant and pointed in the notes, and it truly becomes so scary. It's at the part where Pearl fails her audition and basically just goes haywire, and you can hear that and feel that in the score. Overall, I loved this movie, and I would definitely rate it 5 stars. You should check out my review on Letterboxd and leave your Letterboxd down below because I'd love to see if you guys reviewed it, or just follow y'all on there. Don't hesitate to leave a comment on what you thought of Pearl, or if you don't want to comment about Pearl, comment about the most recent movie you've watched. I watched The Hobbit today, and it just reminded me how much I love this movie and how much I've been craving high fantasy. It hit the nail on the head. I want to give every aspect of this movie a big kiss. It's so good. I know people say it's slow, but I think the timing and the pacing is well thought out and really good. These movies are long as hell, and I think some people just like went and saw it and were like, why was this so long? But then don't realize there are like our extended cuts of the Lord of the Rings that are 4+ hours long, which hopefully I will be watching soon because I haven't seen the extended cuts. And I'm talking so much about the Lord of the Rings when this is a Pearl review.